Welcome to Flipping the Table and another honest conversation about food, farming, and the future. This first episode of our 7th season is quite unique. Dan Imhoff interviews our podcast host, Michael Dimock, about his path into the good food movement and the history of Roots of Change. Dan is the perfect one to do this given their long friendship and numerous collaborations, but also because he is the author of several important books about the food system, among them Farming with the Wild, Enhancing Biodiversity on Farms and Ranches, CAFO, The Tragedy of Industrial Animal Factories, and The Farm Bill, A Citizen's Guide. He is also the host of the Full Expression podcast, which features conversations about the creative process with creative people. This first Flipping the Table episode of 2025 kicks off a year that will explore how food system change is actually achieved. Enjoy the show.
Greetings. I'm Dan Imhoff, an author, activist, and recording artist, and today I'll be the host of Flipping the Table. My guest is none other than Michael Dimock, the host of Flipping the Table and executive director of the good food advocacy organization, Roots of Change. Michael is a dear friend, and we have collaborated on many projects over the years, including the Healthy Food Declaration, which was written for the 2008 Slow Food Nation event. I know his is a story you will want to hear, as he's often the person behind the microphone asking the questions for Flipping the Table. Michael was born in Washington, D.C., and raised in South Bay, and received his formal education at UCLA and Columbia University. In the 1990s, he worked in Europe for a multinational agribusiness corporation before returning to California to help change the food system. A dedicated activist, champion of better health through better agriculture, and thrower of singularly exceptional dinner parties, it is my pleasure to share this interview with you. Michael Dimock, welcome to this special edition of the Flipping the Table podcast.
It's great to be here on this beautiful property in the middle of Mendocino County.
Yeah, it is a beautiful day by the pond with lots of dragonflies.
Yep.
Well, full disclosure, we're very good friends. We've known each other for quite some time.
Yeah.
It's not the first time that I've interviewed you. I think you were on KZYX.
Oh, yeah. Wow,
Farm and Garden Show.
24 years ago.
And as part of these creativity conversations, I would say that today is really going to be about activism, advocacy, and trying to make change in the world.
Yeah.
What do you think that describes what you do?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's what we try to do. Yep. At Roots of Change.
Okay, so I always like to go to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you born?
I was born in Washington, D.C.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I thought you were born in San Jose.
No, my dad was. I was born when my dad was in dental school at Georgetown. I was born in 1958, Georgetown Hospital.
Wow. Okay. You grew up in San Jose.
I grew up in San Jose, mostly, yeah. From my parents moved back when I was 3 or almost 4, and grew up in San Jose, and then later in Palo Alto. Yeah.
And a little bit of a spoiler, I've been reading this book that you're working on, and it starts out in your youth in San Jose, and you're kind of witnessing the transformation of American agriculture to suburbia in the post-World War II era.
Yes. It was the explosion of what became the Silicon Valley. We moved into a new development it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, so it had been 1963, and it was a new home.
Why do you remember that?
Because it was when my brother was born, and he was born during the missile crisis.
You remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
I don't
you were 4 years old?
No, I don't remember the Cuban Missile Crisis when it happened. I remember the reference to it later when we would talk about my brother's birth and when we moved, yeah.
Okay. And they were basically just ripping out orchards
all around
you.
It was all orchards when we first arrived. I used to play in them, and then by the time I was out of high school, they were all gone. 15 years.
I grew up in Pennsylvania in Haynes Acres, which was Haynes Orchard, and they were just chipping away into the woods and into the orchards until it was all just, suburbia.
Yep.
It was a good place to be from.
Yeah, me too. It was beautiful when I was a kid. When I looked out my window where I slept at night in my bedroom, and I would look out and I could see Mount Hamilton in the distance. And Santa Clara Valley was gorgeous. And when my dad was there, San Jose, 56,000 people, when he was born in 1932. And it was all orchards everywhere. 7 million trees, hundreds of thousands of acres.
Yeah. Great place to grow, and just like Sonoma County and Mendocino County where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And you were a real kind of troublemaker, nature boy.
Yeah, it was the 1960s and 70s, so yeah, I was kind of wild. I had a lot of wild friends who had older brothers and sisters who were really wild, some of which didn't live through that. And and then my dad had relationship to my cousins who had a cattle ranch, so I spent a lot of time on that natural world kind of environment. And then my dad taught me to backpack when I was very young. I think my first time I went backpacking, I was 10. And so I became an avid backpacker in my youth in the Sierra. A little bit in the Rockies and a little bit in the White Mountains of Idaho.
Okay, so somehow you managed to graduate from high school.
Yes. Somehow.
And then where did that take you for your education?
Well, I went to a JC for 2 years to recover from my high school, but I did really well. And then I went to UCLA as an undergrad and studied U.S. history. And then I traveled. I went to Nepal and India. I worked for Jerry Brown when he was governor the first time, and then I went to graduate school back east at Columbia studying international affairs.
What did you do in Nepal?
I worked in a village where they grew rice and millet. I taught English and worked with the nurses. There was a clinic there, and barefoot doctors would come through periodically, and so I was just kind of an assistant. It was really a cultural exchange more than anything else. I was with a buddy of mine, a good friend of mine, and we lived in the top story of this 3-story wooden and stone house that was owned by the kind of village elders. And it was a really great experience. I saw a lot of things I never could have imagined as a kid. Yeah, it was incredible. Nepal's a beautiful place, and it was a 2-day walk, almost 2.5-day walk to Kathmandu from where I was. And it was amazing. Changed my life.
Like a 22-year-old kid when you talk about being a kid?
Yeah, let's see. I went there in 1979, and I came back in 80.
Okay.
So I was 21.
Yeah.
I turned 21 there.
Yeah.
I remember my 21st birthday was there.
So what were some of your big life-changing takeaways from that experience? It seems like it was sort of almost like a Peace Corps experience or something.
Yeah, briefer, but yes, it was. I remember walking into the village the first time where we were going to stay, which was along this washed out, had been a road at one point briefly, and so it was washed out. And I remember walking through this valley, and it was during the time when we were seeing, all the movies about Vietnam. And I remember walking through the rice paddies through this valley and thinking, God, this is like my Vietnam experience. Luckily, it's not war, but I am living in a completely different world. And,
extreme poverty.
What we would call poverty from the West, but they lived a subsistence life, but it was also very beautiful, a lot of ritual. One of the greatest memories of that time was we lived along the river in a kind of, they were market makers, they were tradesmen and fishermen, but then all these mountain people would come down periodically for these rituals because there were these rocks that had some animistic spiritual power, and they would come and have these kind of gatherings and drum and music and singing and dancing, and it was so beautiful, the colors all, and these beautiful young Nepali women with feathers and rocks and stones adorning them. It was just an incredible experience to see. I remember I was like blown away.
Wow. Okay, so you had this life-changing experience, and then you went back to Columbia, NYU grad school.
I went back to UCLA actually to finish UCLA and spent a couple of years there. And that's when it was that experience. Also, when I was there was when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and I became very aware of the impact of international relations, the great powers struggles over a country like Nepal. Because while we were there, they were cutting the budget to Peace Corps because of the war, getting ready, I guess, to arm up in case that war got bigger. So I saw that impact, and so I went back and started studying the Soviet Union and the Cold War. and finished. And then I went to Columbia for international affairs because of that. But the other thing I saw there was death. Growing up in the Bay Area, my father was a dentist. We lived, a very comfortable lifestyle as children. And I had never really witnessed things like I saw there, babies dying, people extremely ill, things that 20-year-old kid wouldn't see normally unless they went to war.
I just recently saw an amazing movie, Between the Mountains and the Sky, or Between Mountains and the Sky, about a woman, amazing woman who went to Nepal, and she ended up creating a home for orphaned children, and that grew and grew and grew, to like 70 kids over her time there. Very, very young, super inspiring activist.
And it's at current times.
Yeah, it's just a brand new documentary, incredibly
I want to see
emotional, moving movie, about Nepal. Well, after getting through graduate school in international relations, which I did at Syracuse University in 1983, you found your way to Europe.
Yeah, I worked for an agribusiness company. I came back I'd been studying to Russia, Gorbachev, basically, because it was during his time. And I had been working for the networks, the Discovery Channel, and doing consulting for CBS and others because I spoke Russian. And I couldn't get the job I wanted at the Discovery Channel. So I came back to California and basically was idle for 6 months. I was having dreams about floating in space. It was just crazy. And out of the blue, I got a call from a family friend who said, "Hey, I heard you speak Russian. Are you interested in working in agriculture?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, come down and we'll interview." And I got hired to work for a California agribusiness company, which I spent almost a year working in Sanger in the San Joaquin Valley, little town east of Fresno, learning about the citrus concentrate and fresh citrus business and tomato paste business. After almost a year, they sent me to Europe.
I don't understand. You speak Russian. Hey, come work in the Central Valley in the tomato paste citrus business.
Well, the vision of this company, which was called Riverbend, which was a publicly held agribusiness company, was to go, it was about, as you remember, back in that time, they were considering opening up the EU and creating the common market in Europe, and then they wanted to get into Eastern Europe. So they wanted someone who could deal with Eastern Europe to work with this senior guy who spoke only English. I only used Russian one time in my job for them, so it didn't really pan out the way they thought, but I learned a hell of a lot living in Spain and in Holland about agriculture.
Okay, so you get sent to Spain in 1985?
It was December of 88. I went in May of 88. I went to Europe I went to Spain for the summer. They sent me for the summer.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was hot. Down in Murcia, you know where it is?
Of course.
Yeah. And then
Southeast Spain.
Yeah. Beautiful, a lot like Santa Clara Valley in California agriculture. And so it was a beautiful place then.
A lot of almonds down there.
Yeah, and we were in citrus. We were in oranges and lemons. That's the country I lived in, the kind of country I lived in when I wasn't in town. And then they also, we had an apartment up in Holland because we were shipping product out of the Rotterdam, the big port. And so I would spend a lot of time up there too.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. And then they gave me a car and I was driving all over Germany, France, Belgium, trying to sell citrus concentrate and tomato paste to these large manufacturers of beverages, primarily in sauces. McDonald's was our largest client.
Ketchup
and
orange juice.
Yeah, orange juice and the saucy dipping sauces, stuff for dipping sauces.
So at that time, did you learn anything about agriculture, or was it more just about output and commodities and things that you were buying?
It was certainly commodity oriented because I was part of the trading wing really of this company because we were hedging our own production by buying from other places to keep our prices flat for the big clients like McDonald's who didn't want huge price spreads over a course of time. We would sign contracts that had floors and ceilings to keep their price steady so they could put a price up on their boards in the restaurants. So they couldn't face a lot of fluctuation. So we were trading at the same time. So I was part of this team that was doing that. And so I did learn about the commodity markets and I learned about what big manufacturers wanted. But when I had lived in Sanger, I lived on a citrus ranch, a 250-acre citrus ranch right on the edge of the Sierra. And it was beautiful. So I learned about big agriculture. And then also because I was driving around Europe, I was seeing what all these communities and the people that really cared about the food from the region was. So I was having this contrasting experience of local, regional, kind of our agriculture, what we want, high quality food, and then I was working for the big agriculture.
Okay. And did you have a tipping point where you were like, okay, I'm out of here, I can't do this anymore? Or
two things happened. Yeah, one was my boss, who was really cool, a guy who'd grown up, Michel Badowski. He was born in France. His father was in the French underground during the war and was poisoned by the Nazis. So after the war, he was dying, so they went to Venezuela. I don't know why, for money reasons they could buy more there, whatever. And his father died, and he became kind of the patriarch of the family and worked for American agribusiness there. And he was really smart, spoke many languages, and he would tell me the most important thing in work is to build solid relationships, trusting relationships with people. So I worked for him. And so I was kind of learning about business and how to work with people, and then I was seeing these two worlds. He gave me a project which kind of changed my mind. He said, there's a company that's growing organic oranges. They want to scoop out the middle of those organic oranges and place organic sherbet ice cream inside those. I want you to study the market. Is there a market for that product? So that got me thinking, and this is 1987, 88. I think this is 1988, thinking about organic for the first time. That's how it began. And then shortly after that, you remember the Gulf War, the first Gulf War.
Sure.
The price of tomato paste, which was our largest product, went from $1.17 a pound to like 18 cents when they shut down the Gulf of Hormuz, because the Middle East was the largest buyer of tomato paste at that time. And the company suddenly was in deep financial trouble. And so they started giving golden parachutes to all the top people in the company and taking all of the money from all of us and firing everybody, including I had a bonus coming, and they were going to take my bonus. And somebody who worked for the CFO told me, they're going to take your bonus. So I cashed out before they took my bonus, got my money, and quit.
I don't know how that works. How did you cash out?
I got my bonus before they took it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
And then what?
Well, it wasn't a lot of money, but I mean, nowadays it wasn't a lot of money. But to me, it was a lot of money.
You know, I actually lived in Europe in 86, 87 in Italy, Milan.
Yeah.
I was working for a fashion company. And if I stayed out of the country for 330 days out of 365, then I didn't pay
taxes.
Tax.
I had that advantage.
Okay,
too.
so you had that advantage.
Yeah,
so
that's
that
great.
made a lot of difference, right?
Yes, it did. You kept a lot of your money. You didn't pay a tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great advantage. Yeah. But when I came back, I had that money from my bonus and from the tax savings, and I lived in Dry Creek Valley above Peter and Melita Rogers' house in their guest bedroom of the garage. And I lived there.
Outside of Healdsburg,
California, yeah. And I had 6 months to kind of sit in my juices and first agonize and then start to realize I wanted to work in agriculture. I wanted to stay in agriculture. I loved it. And I started my own consulting firm and went to work for Select Sonoma County.
Mm-hmm. What did you do?
Select Sonoma County was one of the first, if not the first, federally funded a grant from USDA to develop a regional marketing system that promoted regional products. It was called Select Sonoma County. It was a in-store promotion of the local products.
What were some of the local products?
There were lots. There were cheese, milk, obviously dairy products, duck, obviously lots of apple products, jams and juices and things that are made from apples, obviously wine. There was a ton of products, actually. Berries, fresh berries, a lot of fresh vegetables. Leonard Diggs, that's how I met Leonard Diggs, whom you know, one of the great farmers, organic farmers of the time then. So, lamb, beef. Yeah.
Okay,
Chickens.
so you start to become kind of an early foodie.
Yeah.
Just around the time that kind of awareness is really beginning to take hold.
So 92, 93, 94. And then, so it was a perfect time. And then I joined the slow food movement in 96, 95 or 96.
Okay, so do you consider yourself a creative person?
Yeah, I do actually. I do. I mean, my mother was an artist, as you know, and my uncle was an artist. So yeah, I have definitely a creative streak in me. It's not like you do, painting and writing and music. I mean, painting and music. I'm not that kind of an artist. I'm a different kind of artist, yeah. Writing.
Well, I would just say that, being an entrepreneur, even a social entrepreneur, activist entrepreneur, it requires a lot of hats.
Yeah.
I mean, and it requires a lot of problem solving and image creation and mission creation and all kinds
communication.
Of really quite important skills.
Yeah, it is a creative act to do that stuff. I didn't realize that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it was in the 2000s I realized, this is creativity.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about slow food.
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn about them? And
that's a good. So there's a lot of creativity in slow food, right?
Oh yeah.
Carlo Petrini, the founder, who was a journalist and Italian from northern Italy, a little town called Bra outside of Torino, and he was a radical thinker and a progressive, a communist in the Italian sense. But he had been very creative. He was doing actions that would awaken people to the need to appreciate rural people, agrarian people that were raising the foods, and the damage that was being done by McDonald's and the fast food world. And he came to the United States in the early 90s and started to promote the development of the slow food movement. And two women in Healdsburg who were promoted wine, were PR company, had gone to Italy and run into the slow food movement and started one of the first chapters in California. Alice started hers down in Berkeley a few months after these two great women.
Alice Waters.
Yeah, Alice Waters started one down in Berkeley. And here in Dry Creek Valley, Healdsburg, they started the Slow Food Sonoma County Slow Food. And I joined that.
Isn't it true that Slow Food and Carlo Petrini's actions were in reaction to the establishment of a McDonald's at this Piazza di Spagna on the Spanish Steps in Rome?
Right.
And so this was...
You should describe what they did, because that was a creative act.
I can't remember what they did.
The day they were going to open, he assembled a bunch of people, and they stood in two parallel lines on the entrance into McDonald's, holding bowls of pasta, standing in silence as people went in to buy fast food.
Okay.
That was his act. And then he wrote an article about that went all over Italy.
I mean, and it is quite interesting. You're talking about creative acts and things like that, and it might not seem so profound. I remember very clearly when McDonald's entered my life as a teenager, as a young, maybe I was like 12, you might call me preteen or something like that. But I had three brothers, and we were all, constantly doing something that required being driven around. My parents, my dad especially, was an incredible cook, and we really came from a family that valued meals and cooking and deliciousness and celebration, togetherness, and yet we became easy prey for McDonald's.
Right.
That was the first that arrived in our town. You very quickly got onto their conveyor belt of milkshakes and fries and whatever you were having. However, I think very clearly by the time I was 17, I was done. It was like I'd had the experience many times of eating something that tasted good, but then after a while you didn't feel so good.
Yeah.
Right. And so it really lost its luster kind of quickly. And I don't think I've ever eaten McDonald's really. Definitely not a hamburger since I was, 17 years old, and I, completely changed my life around. So it was in reaction to a global phenomenon that was really trying to change the way we eat.
Yeah, and it worked, right? I mean, McDonald's and the companies that became like McDonald's changed.
They're doing well in Valencia, Spain.
Right.
Which has a pretty strong food ethic.
Yeah.
And food culture.
That's right. It was the same it was the same in Holland. It was the same in France. I mean, I remember going to a McDonald's because they were a client, going to McDonald's in Paris. I remember. It was crazy. So yeah, it changed. And when I worked at Riverbend, that company, the model of the best food business company in the world that we were taught was McDonald's, because they had a 15% return on investment, which was high for that sector back then.
Probably still is.
Yeah. And so, that was, and they were industrial. It was industrial. And that was what I decided to reject. And that's why I went to work with Slow Food and became really an advocate and a participant in the slow food movement.
What did you do? I mean, and what was their mission?
Their mission was to promote the small producers who were doing regional products that represented the cultures of those regions, and to defend those products by building a list of endangered foods globally. United States, we were involved in building a list of endangered foods. And then we were
The Ark of
Taste. It was called the Ark of Taste, thank you. And then we started something that were called Presidia, which is a Latin word for wall or protective wall. So then we started projects, and we started two big projects. One to protect turkeys, and the other was to protect the Gravenstein apple. And then,
which is a great apple that we grow right
it's right here
on
this property. Yeah. So, and then we also later protect the red apple. The Petaluma Red is called the Petaluma Red. It's not apple, potato.
Oh yeah. No, the Bodega Red.
Bodega Red, thank you, Bodega Red. So three products from Sonoma County that we put on the Ark, and then built Presidia to protect them, build a market for them.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then I got involved. I was the head of I started a new chapter, the Russian River chapter, and then I became the U.S. chairman of the board for the organization. And then I got on the international board, and those were great experiences because I got global experiences. And you and I went together in 2004 to the first Terra Madre event.
Yeah,
that was 20 years ago.
It's amazing. So by that time, I was writing books. I'd written a book called Farming with the Wild. So that it was 2004.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a bold move Terra Madre was to bring small producers from all over the world to Torino, Italy, and to create places where you could taste their products and really interact with them and hear their stories. And there was this kind of spontaneous cultural bazaar, like cultural marketplace, where there were nomadic people from
Maasai tribesmen.
Yeah, from the Middle East and North Africa and all over, and they had these really amazing, colorful
reindeer people from up north.
Yeah, and so everybody was there, and they kind of had brought contraband in, like crazy cow blood or some cheese or
reindeer meats. I remember,
or
turkeys,
or an oil, like some kind of vegetable oil or nut oil that you'd never heard of before.
Right. I remember there were Andean potatoes and coffees from South America.
Yeah. So it was a beautiful idea. This idea of
it was 10,000.
Let's celebrate the small producer and this arc of vanishing taste.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was an amazing, one of the highlights of my life, actually, kind of memories of my life, was seeing that collection of people as you were describing. It was an incredible time.
I remember Prince Charles, who's now the King of England.
Right.
I've been whining and dining myself through the Salone di Gusto. And then he went into this really interesting, like, anti-GMO talk, right? There was a lot of anti-genetic engineering going on because the city of Torino had just adopted an anti-GMO policy, and perhaps even the Italian government.
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I don't remember that, but I do remember that he gave what you would call a radical talk back then.
Yeah.
And
I was a journalist at the time,
right.
So I was interviewing people. I did give a talk about farming with the wild, and it was really impressive. It showed immense creative thought about how you stick up for something
Agrarian
so
people.
valuable.
It was agrarian.
Yeah.
It was a celebration of agrarianism and agrarian people globally.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting thing, too, because that was during the right-wing government, like they have now in Italy. Between then and now was liberal governments, but it was during a conservative government, and Carlo Petrini was able to get funding for that event from a conservative government because of its promotion of rural and agrarian peoples. That was very interesting.
Yeah. Which was still, and possibly is still, really important to Italians.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they have a struggle. They have now obesity rates larger than the United States in their youth. Fast food, despite the slow food movement, has had a huge impact. But yeah, it was, so that milieu of people that were drawn to slow food in California, across the United States, all around the world, and particularly in Europe, was a very fertile place for an American to go and experience. And a lot of food movement people in the United States now were impacted by those early years of slow food.
Yeah.
Because they opened a conversation between consumers and activists and farmers, that nexus.
And it's a conference that's a gathering that still takes place all these years later.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
Okay.
The next one's this fall.
Uh-huh. In Torino.
In Torino in September.
Mm-hmm. Terra Madre.
Terra Madre.
Okay. So fast forward a little bit. I finished a book called Paper or Plastic about packaging, and then I started to work on another book about the Farm Bill, the first Farm Bill book in 2006 and 2007, Food Fight. And what were you doing around that time? You had started Roots of Change, no?
86, 87?
No.
96,
2006.
2006, 2007. I went to work for Roots of Change in July 2006.
Okay,
July
so
7th.
what is Roots of Change, and why did you go there, and why did they hire you?
I had my own consulting firm that was doing consulting, marketing, and promotion activities for rural communities, mostly in California, but also in Australia and a couple other places outside the state. But our job was to promote local and regional products, particularly those that had environmental attributes associated with them, they're organic or whatever. And I had started a project down in Ventura County called the Ag Futures Alliance, which was bringing environmentalists, mainstream farmers, commodity farmers, big farmers, little farmers, and labor activists, environmentalists together to work on the future of agriculture, to keep agriculture alive in Ventura. The Roots of Change Fund, which was a funder of change, trying to change California agriculture as a model for the rest of the world, that was their goal, had funded our project to take it statewide out of the county. And so I got hired after 2 years of being funded to open several of these other Ag Futures Alliances around the state. I went to work for them to run what became known as the Roots of Change Fund, and then eventually the Roots of Change nonprofit. So, and the whole goal was to build the power of the food movement in California by making strategic investments that could accelerate the change to make a more resilient and healthy food system.
Okay. What kinds of things did that do?
Yeah. So what we did is we funded some of the creative things that we did back then, where we continued to fund these regional conversations among stakeholders in their community who wanted to see agriculture survive and become more healthy and resilient. So we had many of these projects around the state that we funded. Then we also funded a series of 3 cohorts of what we called fellows, Roots of Change fellows. So we brought people together to discuss and study what is the food system, what are the places you can make change, and who is involved. And so it was a way to begin to knit a network. We did a lot of network weaving in those early years. And we invested in different kinds of projects that would bring different stakeholders together to think about the complexity, the need for change, and how to change. And then one of the things we did, we talked earlier today, before all this, about Lisa Hamilton, the journalist and author. We hired her way back to travel through the state of California taking pictures and writing essays, photo essays, which was called Real Rural. And then we put up a ad campaign in the BART trains of the Bay Area to bring urban people in back then, the exploding Silicon Valley, to remember that there were rural regions of California and that there were people there. And these were the kinds of people, pictures and words. So what we've tried to do is wake people up to the fundamental importance of agriculture, and our projects have become more and more demonstration projects and policy-oriented projects. So we've been working in coalitions to change California policies, to fund programs that allow small farmers to feed low-income people by providing nutrition incentives so people can double their purchasing power of fruits and vegetables. We've also worked with our coalitions to create the Healthy Soils program to pay farmers to capture carbon, or to do alternative manure management so we don't release so much methane through the management of manure from dairies primarily. So there are many different kinds of projects. Both right now we're working to protect farm workers from heat. We're testing processes, kind of procedures to allow farm workers to stay cool in this heating world, and we're testing equipment right now down in Ventura County that is meant to keep water cool in the hot days in the field, so farm workers can keep their internal body temperatures cool. And then once we get this data, we share it with policymakers and try and make better policies to basically change the subsidies away from commodity agriculture into transformative agriculture.
We hope you're enjoying this conversation of Flipping the Table. Please subscribe to this podcast and write us a brief review and give us a rating. These help us to improve the show and to build our audience. More listeners will help grow the movement to make food and farming solutions to many environmental, health, and social problems we face. It's easy. Please subscribe, review, and rate. Now back to the conversation.
So around that time, Food Fight comes out, and I was really trying to bring some attention to subsidies and, the huge amounts of government money that goes to support agriculture. You and Slow Food USA decided to have a Terra Madre-like gathering in San Francisco.
Yeah, 2008. We started in 2006. To develop what became known as Slow Food Nation, which is the largest single event in the United States in its history so far dedicated to transforming the food system. 55,000 people came to San Francisco for 4 days in 2008, in the fall of 2008. It was when Obama was nominated to be the candidate. It was during the convention.
Okay, and this is when you and I really got to know each other, because you'd come up with this idea to write a declaration for that particular...
The Declaration for Healthy Food and Agriculture.
Yeah, for this event. And it was so much work. Like, you talked me into this project that we came up here to this remote little homestead in Mendocino County with a couple people. And we began to interview the leaders of the quote-unquote healthy food movement, and to write this declaration about agriculture has a problem, and these are the problems, and only by creating healthy food and a healthy food system can we really right this train. And I think you have to remember just like what was going on in California. It really did feel like a movement. You had big spokesmen. People had been working in this field for a really long time, but it felt like by the middle 2000s we were gaining some steam, and we were starting to get a lot of attention to the problems of agriculture and in agriculture, and the struggle to change it and change it for the better.
Yeah, you had Michael Pollan's book was out. Your Food Fight was out. Farming with the Wild was out. Alice was doing her thing around schools and
Edible Schoolyard
and the farm to table movement. We had Wes Jackson and the Land Institute, who was really articulating the need for perennial polycultures in the Midwest to end the destruction of the Midwest and the soil losses. And then you obviously had Wendell Berry out in Kentucky, writing, kind of the philosopher king of our world, writing the intellectual underpinnings of and the kind of philosophical underpinnings of what we needed to do.
And they were all co-creators and editors of this document that I pretty much had to spearhead and hold in my hands.
Yeah, you had to knit it all together.
Yeah, and so we would meet pretty regularly.
Yes.
And scheme and edit,
Wordsmith,
and write and cook.
Yeah.
And that's where our friendship began. And I was thinking, this is really insane. Like, this is so hard, and just like trying to get everybody on the same page, and by the end of it, I was just like, I could get so pissed just by somebody trying to add another word because they thought that they knew better than I did. And I was really kind of at the end of my rope.
Remember the letter we got from Wendell?
Yeah, of course. An ugly turn of phrase.
I can't remember what the phrase we used was.
Too much jargon or like, of course, it was spot on. It was great. And I remember Michael Pollan not being so happy with the way some of the early drafts went.
Right.
And I do think that it went in a really interesting direction, that we were talking about health, because everybody has to agree that healthy is better than unhealthy.
Yeah.
And it's an easy box to put a lot of different things into.
Yes. And it ended up being a really good document. We got to read it at the opening day on the steps of the capital of San Francisco, where the event kicked off. Got covered by
60 Minutes.
60 Minutes, all these kinds of people. It was.
That's when I realized, okay, this was a brilliant idea. Because we were there we were with a whole number of different contributors reading.
Right.
That
was cool.
Live television.
We let people read it, and everyone got their voice in. That was really beautiful.
Yeah, and it was, and it ended up being an amazing event.
It was. It was 3 days.
Watershed event.
Yeah, it made the front page of the New York Times, and the media in the United States started to cover the food movement like never before from that moment on. It really was impactful.
Yeah.
So that was a creative act. There was and it took a lot of people to do it. All the things that went on that 4 days. There were exhibitions. There were centers, different centers around the city where they were featuring different kinds of foods. Remember, there was seafood area. There was a baking area. There was a beverage area. There were incredible talks in the theaters.
Sure.
It was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. Okay, I want to switch gears here.
Okay.
Because
Bullfrog wanted to join our conversation.
Just talk for a minute about what it takes to make a successful slow food dinner party, because you're pretty famous in our area for the parties that you throw in your backyard
and a pre-COVID
in Santa Rosa.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to know a lot of people of different stripes, but also who have a common love of good food and conversation. Conviviality was the word that slow food uses. And so I've always tried to have convivial events where you bring together. So we live in a very culturally rich area. There are a lot of artists, a lot of people that care about food, agriculture. So it was easy to open my doors to my little house in my backyard. But then the important thing is you get the right people, and then you got to just set it up so that there's this flow of different kinds of foods throughout the night. And
okay, these are parties. These are parties that last for hours, like maybe 6 hours, 5 or 6 hours. So people come with their bells on, and usually it's really nice outside, or it could be cold, but anyway, there's a nice vibrant garden backyard, and what I admire about these, the way these things flow is that you don't really care about everything coming out at the same time. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. So, things come out when they're ready.
Yes.
So at one point you could just be eating a starch or potatoes, and then you could be eating vegetables, and then some meat thing comes around, and then some more of something different, and then a big fish comes out, and you're using every single dish and pot and pan and utensil in your house, and you don't have a dishwasher.
No, I like to wash the dishes at the end. It's kind of the end of the ritual for me.
Okay.
It's a ritual.
Yeah. And it gives people a lot of joy.
I'm glad. That's the goal. It gives me joy. It gives me joy. I love to cook that variety of thing. I'm into diversity and variety. Always have been. That's one of the things I loved about Slow Food. It was celebrating that. And so that's what those events are about. People and the food. And the different times of the day. It usually starts when it's still light outside. And you're out there helping me barbecue most of the time.
Most of the time, because I'm not very social.
And
it allows me to be involved without having to
chit-chat. Yeah. And we break open my wine cellar, and we get to taste a lot of different wines.
This is fair, Dodd.
Yeah.
True.
And so that's always fun because they just sit there otherwise. So, it's fun. I haven't done it in a while because, COVID shut it all down. But I'm going to do one this summer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do one this summer.
What did you do for Jerry Brown?
I was a political advance man to start.
What year was this?
82. I was, I'd come back from Nepal and I was finishing up. It was my last, I had 2 semesters left or quarters, whatever we were on then. And a friend of the family called and said, hey, would you like an opportunity to work on a political campaign? And I said, yeah. And he said, I've called a few people that you know, and there's an opportunity to work for Jerry Brown. He's running for Senate. It was when he was leaving office as the governor. And so I said, yeah. So I got a call from, I think it was Jody Krajewski, who started Code Pink later. She called me and said, hey, you need to go downtown to this hotel at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, take the stairs and go to room da-da-da-da-da. I don't remember the room. So I took a friend of mine, Marcellus McCrae, who was a freshman, who was like a 16-year-old freshman at Stanford, at UCLA, brilliant. He went on to Harvard. Anyway, amazing kid, really bright, African-American. And he went with me, the 2 of us, and I walked into the hotel, and the guards that protect him were there, and they asked us who we were, our names were on the list. They sent us up, and we walked knocked on the door, and he said, come in. And I came in, and there was Jerry Brown lying on the bed with his shoes off with pillows behind him. And he asked me like 4 questions and asked me what I was doing, why I wanted to do it. I can't remember what the conversation was. I was kind of in awe because I was a fan of Jerry Brown. And I got the job. So I went to work with him. I went to work for him, and I would ride around in the car for campaign events.
You had to protect Linda Ronstadt.
That was later, yes. Because later, after he lost the race, actually, there was a party. I was at this event. It was an after party, and I was walking around, and then I sat at this table, and I sat down, and I looked to my left, and there was Linda Ronstadt, very petite, very attractive woman. I was like, wow, that's Linda Ronstadt. So then the party was going on, and she was not comfortable. She's like you. She doesn't like to chit-chat, I don't think. So at one point, she grabbed me, and she said, you've got to help me get out of here. And she turned me around and put her hands on my back and said, lead me through this crowd. So I did. And I remember we walked through the room, and then I lost track of her, and that was it. But I did see her years later when I was working for THX Sound, what's his name, Lucasfilm, because she was recording albums there. But that was funny. That was one of the high points of working for him, was seeing her. I loved her.
Okay, all these years later, Roots have changed, this organization that you've been working with for 20 years, almost.
18. Oh, God, really?
It's now a project of the Public Health Institute.
Which is interesting if you go back to the Declaration for Healthy Food and Agriculture. Because we were making a public health statement, as you said, and that's where we ended up moving after many years, being recruited by them to join.
And so you're kind of in the political sphere. You're really working to change policy. Mm-hmm. And what did you learn from Jerry Brown that helps you in your policy and advocacy work here in the state of California?
That's a good question. I learned a couple things. One is politicians are just people. Like I said, when I first met him, I was in awe, and I couldn't talk. I could answer his questions, but I couldn't really think. I got over that.
We had some presidential candidate do that just the other night.
Yes, we did. Oh my God, I don't want to go there. He was just a person, and I got to see a lot of politicians. And after that, I worked on a couple of presidential campaigns, doing kind of spot jobs for people who were doing advanced work. So I saw a lot of politicians, and in the course of that, I realized they're just people. So I'm not afraid of them, and that became really important because I do see in movements a lot, particularly with younger people. They're kind of, like I was when I first met Jerry Brown, afraid to really speak up or be honest. Or you have to be diplomatic and you have to be really strategic, but you can be who you are. And so that was an important lesson. The other is I realized the complexity, what it takes. I was in Jerry Brown's office the last night of his first 2 terms with his 2 secretaries, packing up all the stuff that became his archives. And he walked in the room and he said something very interesting about the fact that he realized that he hadn't been able to do a lot of what he wanted because after he hit office, he was putting out fires. And that's what politics is. If you are a leader, particularly nowadays, it's one fire, literally, or one storm or one dislocation or one disease after another that makes it really hard to follow a line of policy that you want to pursue. So the importance of building alliances to build power became really clear to me. Really clear. You got to have a lot of people on your side, particularly to overcome something like conventional agriculture, what we call commodity agriculture, or the oil and gas industry, or whatever.
Well, one of the things that you're trying to do is to take on big soda.
Mm-hmm. We have been trying to tax them. That's
right.
been hard. Can't do it really.
Yeah.
At the local level now, maybe.
Can you talk a little bit about that? So what you were saying was, hey, if we just tax a can of soda, what, 1 cent or
yeah, it was 2 cents an ounce. It was 2 cents an ounce.
2 cents an ounce.
You and I worked on those ads. Yeah.
Then you could fund all kinds of different programs to help people eat better and be healthier and support smart farmers.
Yeah, we could have raised over $1 billion a year in California, I think, by taxing soda 2 cents an ounce. It would have gone into a fund which would have funded all kinds of projects to create more healthy nutrition for low-income people and everyone, really. And then, like you were saying, regional food systems, small farmers, all kinds of great stuff could have been funded. We tried. The soda industry stopped us. They were able to pass a law a few years ago to basically take away the power of local regions to tax sweetened beverages. That's now been overturned by the courts. So Santa Cruz just this last week, voted they're going to put a local tax back on. The only places that have it now, Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, Berkeley, and Richmond have a tax. And now Santa Cruz. And then they got stopped by the legislature's law, by the big sodas law that got passed in the last minute in a kind of behind the closed doors event under Jerry Brown, actually. And then and now that law has been overturned by the courts, and Santa Cruz is going to be the first of the cities to re-pursue a local tax on sweetened beverages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically they are a big monster, political monster.
Right. And you know what's really interesting? Everyone always talks, I just read this the other day, Milton Friedman, who is the right-wing, considered to be the
University of Chicago.
Right, most right-wing economist who supports the Republican Party's positions or provided the underlying thought. He actually said the best way to control
neoliberalism.
Yes, he was a neoliberal. The best way to control the impacts of large corporations that were hurting things was to tax them. He said that. That's how you recoup the costs of the damage they're doing. He was particularly talking about polluters back in his day. But we know how much it costs California every year, over $40 billion in losses to this state because of diabetes. It's $450 billion for the United States a year. That's what it costs us for diabetes. And sweetened beverages is, by science, shown to be one of the primary causes of type 2 diabetes. So it's incredible. We should be taxing the hell out of it.
Yeah, what I admire about you is you're in the weeds, you're fighting the fight. It's a really hard, almost often unwinnable fight, and yet you still have a lot of optimism, and there's a lot of joy in your struggle, and you have a pretty open mind about who could be your partners in change.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I do find joy in the work, and really it comes from the relationships. I mean, I know a lot of interesting people around the state, lots of farmers and more traditional farmers who are actually really good people and see the problems and are kind of trapped in their system. And then I see a lot of people who are the much more radical, let's make change, let's fight. And they have this joie de vivre and this vision, particularly a lot of the young ones now. And all of that, it feeds me. And I feel good about it, and I love to work with them. And yeah, it's frustrating as hell. You've seen many days when I've been in a bad state. But overall, I love my work, and I'm coming to the end of my career. I'm 66. I hope to be passing on my position in the next 2.5, 3 years. Really, I want to pass it on to a younger person and stay involved in some way. But it's bittersweet to see the end coming because I love it. It's given me meaning. I have a meaningful life because of it.
Okay, and so do you have this feeling that 10 years is a really short amount of time to get something done?
Yes.
To even get your arms around what has to be done? I mean, one of the things that people often say about the quote-unquote good food movement or organic agriculture and trying to make food healthier and available to everyone is just that it's not really working. Like despite all this attention and all these books and all these organizations, it's still a very, very small percentage of the vast sea of food that we overeat all around the world.
Yes.
So the flip side of that is, well, it's taking about, 70 or 100 years for us to get to this point. So we're not going to reverse it anytime soon. But is that how you see it?
Totally
like
see it that way.
It's a generational type of a problem, and you can only bite off so much, and it's going to take you 30 years to even get that little mountain that you're trying to climb.
Yes.
Accomplished.
I think of the racial justice movement, and I think of the end of slavery in 1865 and the ebb and flow of progress there, the retreats and then the advances, and how long it took to get to Obama. And still, look at the problems. There's still incredible racism, violent racism around the country. People doing shit all the time that's unbelievable. And so that's 100 years. That's over 100 years. That's like 140 years. 160 years, whatever. It's a hell of a long time. So I do see there is a big difference between that particular struggle and the struggle we're in now, and that has to do with climate. The world cannot go 165 years to see the kind of change we need. But I will say this, the combination of climate change and fires and storms and pandemic that we experienced, I've seen an acceleration in the work that we're doing, unbelievable. In the last since 2017, 2016, things have really begun to change, accelerate, including the fact that the federal government put over $3 billion into creating regenerative agriculture to capture carbon in the soil and get farmers to start thinking about soil and doing the right thing by their soil. That was a momentous step. How many years have we wanted to see that happen? How much money got pumped into the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, for climate work? Tons of it going in, 60 billion of it going into agriculture. So and what has Gavin Newsom done? Billions of dollars. And we've gotten in our sector 1.2 or 3 billion over the last 2 years. We're trying to get more out of the new bond. As you know, I told you all about it last night, the fight we're having. But if we get 600 million, 500 million, that's going to put us at almost $2 billion. Just our little organizations asking for change here in California in the last 3 years. Change is happening. Now, we have a shit long ways to go. And as you're saying, it's a 20-year fight still to make advances, but climate change in a weird way is one of our best allies because it's going to force change. It's going to force it.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be ready for it. Yeah, way back in Food Fight, I was giving a presentation in Connecticut at this theater. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward made this theater, and I was making a talk, and I was showing slides from the book. basically I would take all this USDA data and go to a graphic designer and turn it into something that was really kind of highly technical, but it was easy to see and ingest. And
infographics, we call them today.
Yeah, infographics, right? So one of them showed a dollar bill and how the dollar bill got spent in U.S. subsidies for food and agriculture, and a couple people, Michelle Nishan and Gus Schumacher, saw this slide, and they said, okay, wow, there's all this money in the nutrition budget. Mm-hmm. We're going to go after that.
Which they did.
We're going to use nutrition money to help people eat healthier. And
Michelle Nishan is a chef, really famous chef who worked for Paul Newman.
Yeah, they were
in the
partners.
Restaurant Next Door, right?
Partners, yeah.
And then Gus Schumacher had been undersecretary, third in charge of USDA under Clinton for 8 years.
Yeah, it was a very amazing event, and it was a very exciting time for me. I was speaking a lot, and I can see that as a writer, you can actually have some impact.
Yes.
Occasionally.
Yeah, well, that led to work that I ended up working with Gus on.
Exactly.
And that changed the federal law. And that now in California we have an analog, and millions of families across the country are getting to buy fresh fruits and vegetables because we provide a matching dollar so they can do that. It works. And so it works.
Wholesome Wave.
Yeah, Wholesome Wave.
I mean, they've told me that was where Wholesome Wave came from.
Right.
That graphic.
Right.
Okay, you're writing a book.
Yes.
You've been working on this book for a while.
Yeah, over 2 years. Yep, and I got to finish it this year.
And okay, this is a creative show. It's a show about creativity. So, what's your process? What's your practice? Do you have one?
I do now. I didn't so much at the beginning. It was very hard for me to get disciplined because, as we've described my job, I get sidetracked so often. But I have now, I would say for the last almost 6 months, I get up in the morning and I write. I wake up very early, 4:30, 5:30, depending on when I go to sleep. And I get up and I write. And it's really helped the process. And you were the one encouraging me to do that. Having written so many books, I looked to you for help. And the other thing that we did is we really outlined. I started that outlining work with you here on this property. We would outline the book, which led to an outline that's now complete, which you've seen. It's going to evolve. It's iterative, but we have something solid to work with. And so I'm able to follow a trail now, and I'm chapter by chapter getting up and writing. The other big piece is that I was so self-critical because there's so many great books out there of our movement, so I feel a lot of pressure. Like, how am I going to distinguish what I'm doing that's different from everybody else?
How are you going to do that?
Well, I'm writing about the movement. Now, people don't really write about the movement. They write about their expertise in one area. My expertise is really about how to organize and organizing. So I'm writing really about kind of the history of the food movement and my experience as a member of that, trying to weave in little pieces of my experience with people. So I'm trying to highlight a lot of people that I know in the book and what they've done and how it contributes to this overall change activity of the good food movement. And so I'm focusing on that piece more than anything, which is different. I mean, Michael Pollan focused on that story of the cow and then tied it to a bunch of stuff, but it was more a critique of the movement. I'm talking, of agriculture. Most of the books are critiques of agriculture in some way. I'm talking more about the movement.
Yeah. What do you have to say to young people who want to walk in your footsteps?
Well, I think you got to follow your heart. I mean, one of the things that I remember a lot about the early years of my work was doubt about whether I was crazy to be pursuing the creation of this consulting firm and then the nonprofit. Like, why am I doing this? I was in debt, using my credit cards, borrowing money from my parents, trying to make it work. But every time I tried to quit, I couldn't. There was something in me. So I listened to that voice that really wants you to pursue what it is that you love. Because I love agriculture. I mean, because I see it as the place where humans can be, if they're wise and doing the right thing by the natural system. It is a place of incredible intimacy between the earth and human beings, agriculture, because it's where we intervene in natural systems. And until we get that process of intervening in line with the laws of nature, we're going to screw things up until we change it. So I think it's like the most exciting thing to be doing is changing how we feed ourselves, because it has been the most destructive act on the planet, and it has to become the most regenerative act if we have any hope.
Are you sympathetic, empathetic, even with the big guys and the really large industrial producers?
I think that the corporate leaders who run these companies have a lot to learn. So I am a critic of those who put profit before people and the planet. I see some of those big corporations trying to change. The question is, are they changing fast enough? I have a lot of criticisms. I believe most of the farmers in this country who are working in the commodity systems, they're basically trapped. They don't have many choices. They're trapped. They have to work in that system or they're going to go out of business. They're going to lose their farm. So one of the things that we're focused on now is how do you make that transition? How do you help people make that transition? I just wrote that whole chapter that you read on meat about that. How do you get people out of that very, very confined, trapped system?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of bad actors. Yes, there are. You read about them all the time. The people that are using kids in the meat factories. I mean, those things are unacceptable. They're people who care more about money than anything else, and they're screwing up the world.
Yeah.
I will criticize them from here until tomorrow. I mean, until the end of the earth. But I have a lot of empathy for a lot of other people in those systems. A lot of empathy.
Right. Michael, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, it's been
Michael
a joy.
Dimock. Yeah.
Great to be with you, Dan. Really appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed the show. Please share it with your friends and listen to our next monthly episode of Flipping the Table, hosted by Roots of Change, a program of the Public Health Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building a healthier world.